Let's talk about free speech. You're still not ready. You're still not ready. But this will have to do. Let's start with a hypothetical. I am a business owner. Let's say that I have made the egregious error of starting a restaurant. Of all the people who know better than to do that, okay, we don't have time. I'm starting a restaurant. I need a general manager to manage the restaurant. Because I don't have time for the shit I'm doing right now. Why am I buying a restaurant? What is wrong with you, Lampe? Anyway, this general manager has to run the place, right? I need them to be the face of this place to the staff that are hired, which is already something extremely important that we don't talk about in our society anymore because it's too Marxist to treat fucking employees like they're human. Public has to face this person as well, sometimes to a more or less extent, depending on what our public facing might be or what kind of marketing we might have, right? So like local commercials, perhaps, and maybe it's not that big, right? They maybe visit tables to make sure that everything is okay on a busy night or something like that. That person says something anti-Semitic. They say, and I know that that sounds like a ludicrous example. It is not. It is not. Not where I live. People would be like, oh, wow, that's really offensive, but he has a right to say that, and I would die for his right to say so. Yeah, me on the other hand, though, I own the restaurant. I am his employer, and I have to deal with the fact that people aren't going to want to eat at the racist restaurant, right? So what am I going to do about that? I have to replace him. I couldn't keep him on, even on an ethical level, because he has to be the face for the employees who come in and has publicly expressed something extremely offensive, quite possibly to some of them personally, right? Not alone just to the fact that it's something that degrades our society in general. Have I imposed upon his freedom of speech? The answer to that question is extremely difficult for Americans to conceive of for some reason. Probably something to do with the way that we have a tendency to sort of ideologically enshrine rather than teach our history, right? So when you're a kid and they talk about how important the Constitution is, they don't tell you that it's a legal document, right? Like this is, it's a foundational legal document, but legal documentation is about things that judges and lawyers argue about until somebody comes to some sort of a conclusion that has the consequences decided by law, not a religious document, right? Like this isn't something where somebody on high said every person in this country must have the capacity to speak their mind. What it means is that the United States government cannot, under any circumstances, silence a member of the public. That's what it means. They do, by the way, but we don't have time for that. I do not have time for that. It winds up being extremely indirect, especially under neoliberalism, because corporations decide how your tax dollars are spent, which decides how laws are implemented, usually in interests to corporations. So people who say things that are inconvenient for corporations don't have a tendency to get heard very much, whereas people that have a tendency to say things that are good for corporations, especially certain corporations, those people, you never hear the end of them. It winds up all fucking over the place. Completely happenstantially. But that's a matter for another time. If the United States passed a law that said that certain kinds of public demonstration were illegal, that would be a violation of the First Amendment. So when a celebrity says something that is generally offensive to the public, are they having their First Amendment rights violated when they are removed from their projects? Like Roseanne Barr and Tim Allen most famously. Well, the answer to that question is very much no. One guy decided, I cannot work with somebody who said something like that because it is a personal problem for me and it's bad for business. And here's another issue with freedom of speech when you're talking about trying to keep someone who is running their own public platform from being able to kick people off for saying things that lead to violence in the case of Donald Trump. Even if you think you're being apolitical when you say that because they deserve a right to free speech, what you're actually saying is that the person who owns that business, that liberal ideological ownership of a business, doesn't get to decide how that business runs when it's inconvenient for your worldview. Are we guaranteed free speech because there should be some kind of legal limit to stopping somebody else or reacting to what somebody else says? For example, should we have to allow Donald Trump to make tweets? Because if the answer to that question is yes, who polices it? And if that sort of regulation exists, are you saying that the former president of the United States could, say, make an order to have someone arrested for violating their freedom of speech when they claim they're still president of the United States? Because that's not free speech for sure, right? So consider very carefully when you start talking about matters of free speech, who is doing the speaking? Oh, we are not ready for Habermas. We haven't really talked about the rights basis of liberalism either. Focus on property. The person who runs a business gets to decide who they hire and fire based on certain principles, which are... That's still not going to work because then I have to bring up race. 5 minutes. I'm going to bring up race in 5 minutes. It has to just be over. Thank you for your time.